Hey, welcome, welcome everybody. First of all, let me get a few things out of the way. As you guys may know, we have had a lot of social media attention.
It's all messed up. Sorry, Steve.
What?
Sorry, keep going, Steve. It's like the layout's all messed up.
Oh, the layers. I'm not watching the outside chat. You'll fix it. All right, we have people for this. We have people that fix this kind of stuff. But let you guys know that in the video description, we have the ATA social media links. If you want to go to check us out on agreetoargue.com, Facebook link, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you want to tweet to us, we're at agreetoargue.com. Or excuse me, agree to argue.
Yeah, this is the most professional of all programs. I'm Fuzz Rana. That's of course Steve McCrae, and we're the co-host of this fine program. And today we're going to take on, I think, a really fun and interesting question, which is there a basis for morality and ethics without God? And just dropped my headphones. So again, we are the most professional of all programs here. This is actually, I think, a fairly common challenge leveled against people that are non-theists. Wouldn't you agree, Steve, that if you don't believe in God, then you really have no basis for morality and for ethics? And so we're going to give you a chance to kind of address that question and then hopefully have a spirited conversation. But to mix things up a bit and to make everything even more entertaining, hopefully, we've brought in our mutual friend, Dr. Kenny Rhodes. And Kenny is an ordained Southern Baptist pastor. He's also a scholar and a gentleman. He's has an MDiv and then also a PhD in theology. And Kenny is also a drummer. He at one time, I guess, was playing in a Tower of Power cover band. So anyway, Kenny, welcome to the party. So Steve, I'll give you a chance to go ahead and take on the question. So what would you say as a non-theist to the charge that as a non-theist, there is no basis for morality and ethics if you don't embrace belief in God?
Yeah, let me kind of start off, because this is a topic that I think is one of the most difficult and most challenging topics in all philosophy. There is no right or wrong answers when I think of how people are going to look at morality. But I think there's something that's contingent upon the fact that we all want to be moral people. So when we and myself start talking about morality, I have certain presuppositions that people want to be moral. If they don't, then why have these engagements, right? Why they want to know what is the right or wrong actions to be had given a specific situation, a normative, an ought of what they ought to do given a moral quandary of sorts. And my position
and I'm glad you said that, because I want to make it clear that I don't think either Kenny or I don't want to speak for Kenny, but I don't think either Kenny or I actually would ever take the position that people that are non-theists are immoral or inherently immoral or can't be good people. I think we all believe that is indeed possible, that most people that are non-theists want to be good people. And can be good people and can be exemplary. So just wanted to make sure that we clarified that point. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no, absolutely. No, and I agree. I think that there are some Christians out there, unfortunately, that have this really kind of bizarre understanding of morality, such that they think that if to be a moral person, you have to have a God belief, which I think is completely untenable. The other position from some Christians, which I think is at least a more generalized tenable position, would be in order to have morality, there has to be some kind of God to have structured it, have given it, right? But the non-believer like myself may not even be recognizing that he's applying these kind of normative ethical positions to either himself or to other people. So I think that's a much better way to go, that, hey, look, for Christians to say, hey, God exists, therefore we have morality and blah, 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 that's fine. But when you say, hey, a non-believer cannot be moral unless he believes in God, I think you're already out of the gate, not really addressing what it means to be moral, because all morals have to do is what do you think is the best course of action given a decision to be made for an ethical decision, right? And there's different theoretical normative theories out there, right? And when I say normative, as opposed to like meta-ethical theories, what ought you do? And you could appeal to different things, like appeal to consequentialism, utilitarianism, divine command theory, virtue ethics. And the problem that I have with the theists when they start positing this belief that in order to have morality, you have to have a God, it doesn't satisfy anything to me about what it is the reasons why you're appealing to. If I say to myself, Steve, is it okay to lie? Right? And I have to ask myself, is that a moral question that I think is true? That I think that it is the case that is never a good reason to lie. Kantians, right, would argue that position, right? Somebody who accepts a Kantian approach would say it is always immoral to lie. It's morally impermissible to lie. I don't hold to that, right? I hold to more of what's called a virtue ethics position, where it is okay to lie if it's not going to harm somebody. If, for example, if you don't want to be brutally honest where you want to hurt somebody's feelings, but you don't want to be lied to be deceptive. So you want a kind of a happy medium. It's called the Archimedean medium. And I think that when you have a ethical theory that you can appeal to, like myself, then having something like divine command theory or having something like God existing to tell us what is moral is at the most redundant. I think it's probably superfluous, but I think at most it's redundant because it's not something that we need, because God himself is going to have to either appeal to some other type of form of ethical theory, like consequentialism, like don't do this act because I say so because of the consequences, because he's all knowing, or because he has some capricious, arbitrary reasoning being why he had a certain thing to say that it was immoral, like eating shellfish. Seems pretty capricious to me.
Yeah, well, but and I'm completely a novice when it comes to moral philosophy. So I'm a biochemist. I'm not a moral philosopher. But it seems to me that when you talk about normative ethics, which I think is what everybody's really interested in, I agree with you. Don't you have to, though, at some point, pay some attention to what you actually mean by good, by concepts like harm, right? I mean, it seems to me like you've got to somewhere along the way provide some definition of what you think is good, right? What do you think is bad, or why is it wrong necessarily to inflict harm upon a few in order for the benefit of the greater? So it seems like you're presupposing certain definitions, right?
Well, actually, no, because the thing with the goodness is I don't presuppose a definition for goodness, because I don't think there really is a strong way to define good, right? Moore's natural argument, I think, is such that if you try to define morality and what is good, there's going to be some problems. Like, it's good that I do this because I feel better. It makes me happy. There's some problems with that naturalistic approach. But I think that you're right, though. We have to have a grounding for some kind of morality. I tend to what's called moral realism, which is objective morality, although I do admit fully that there are subjective moral cases. There's also morals that are relative to certain cultures. It's called cultural moral relativism. And that because these moral facts exist and that we have access to them, I think they are discoverable. I think we can determine what a moral fact would be. Then we are grounding upon that on what I like to call eudaimonia, which is Sam Harris's approach to harms and benefits. So if our goal is to not cause harm and to maximize, reduce harm and promote eudaimonia, then we have some kind of standards by which we have an objective moral framework. And it doesn't even have to be objective morals. It can be any kind of morals, because the whole point of having morals is that we are agents of moral consideration, right? We live in a society where we deal with other people. And because of that, we have to have a way to kind of get along. If I steal from you, right, and it harms you, then we can say that it's morally impermissible to steal from somebody, correct? Because of the consequences, right? It consequentially has harmed you. And my position is that in order to establish that, all you have to do is appeal to the fact that it has harmed somebody in the theory of consequentialism, although I don't specifically adhere to that. But you don't need a God to do that. I don't need a God to tell me it is bad to steal from somebody if it harms them, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, I know Kenny's just dying to get in here. I can see it. I don't know if he's on camera yet. But, Kenny, do you agree, though, that as somebody who's like myself, who's a non-believer, I am perfectly capable of formulating my own moral decision-making without appealing to some kind of omnipotent being, because I can appeal to some other form of normative ethical theory, correct?
I would say that you are capable of doing anything that I can do as a human being, and you don't need to believe in God or to even submit to the proposition that there is a God or any form of deism to be good and to do good, because we're talking about something that is epistemologically known to us in an inherent way, as you were speaking of. Any kind of internal examination tells us that we do have a sense of what is right and wrong.
Mhm.
There may be different levels of agreement and disagreement on that, but I certainly believe that, as Christopher Hitchens would always ask when he was debating, he would ask the theist, what could the theist do that he couldn't do? And the answer is, as an atheist or a theist, you have the knowledge of what is right and wrong as kind of a gut feeling, the conscious, as we would say.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that all people, most people have people that are like not sociopaths tend to have a visceral reaction to certain things, right? I mean, may not be able to put our figure on it. We may not be able to say, hey, why is this action bad? Why should we not go out and just, murder people left and right? We have a visceral response to that. And I think that's over a societal period of time, we've learned through evolution that doing things like this are bad. And so epistemologically speaking, of how we acquire these moral facts are simply because of trial and error over years of evolution. And so that biological imperatives that we have are actually something that are hardwired into us. They're basically our programming, even though we may not be able to explain it fully. I know a lot of people that just don't go around studying moral theory, right? They don't care whether they appeal to virtue ethics or consequentialism, but they know for some reason certain things are wrong. There is that instinctual level, but being able to explain to somebody is very complicated. Well, what makes it wrong? What is you appealing to? Are you appealing to a rule? If I say, hey, it is wrong to drive faster than 55, the speed limit is 55, you have some kind of rule that you are using as some kind of measure, right? You're saying, okay, so this deontologically is the case. I have a duty not to speed, because if I do, I am doing something morally impermissible, right? And so the theist is saying, hey, God's saying you shouldn't do this. And the main problem I have with that, man, is that by them doing that, they've deferred ever trying to really formulate any coherent normative ethical framework for themselves. They've just deferred it to somebody else, said, yeah, you know what, whatever's good or bad is what God says. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to, why do I need to bother?
Let me jump in here, Steve,
Sure.
Because, I've given this point some thought, and, to build off of Kenny's point, we all have this in the point you're making, we all have this inherent understanding of what is right or wrong.
Yeah, I think there are sociopaths that don't. But
yes, exactly. Yeah, and as a Christian, we would say, well, God, because we bear God's image, there is a law that is written on our hearts, right? That is imbued to us by our Creator and by virtue of the fact that we are image bearers. But in a sense, from a Judeo-Christian ethical framework, the commands, the divine commands that we are to obey. Oops, keep losing my earphone there. The divine commands that we are to obey actually reflect a logic of sorts, if you will, because as image bearers, the way we treat one another is the way that we would treat God. And so because every human being bears God's image, every human being has an inherent worth and dignity and inherent value. And so all of the commands that we're given in terms of how we are to behave in an ethical and a moral framework are actually a reflection of that concept or that logic of, again, every human being has moral worth and value. And so all of the 10 commandments can be explained in that fashion.
I agree with you, Fuzz, on that. And I would go a step further, and I've thought about this quite a bit. Is there anything that's not accessible to us by an examination of the nature of reality and accessible to us via the light of natural reason, that is different than what we find in Scripture, meaning that there's nothing that Scripture says that all human beings don't have an innate sense of that being the good or the right or the wrong. So what I'm saying is that I don't adhere to any kind of divine command theory, because I think that by the nature of reality, I'll call it creation as a Christian, the way that reality has been created, the way that I have been created, which corresponds and coheres to that reality, gives me an agreement that the things that I intuitively know are also, they are bore witness to by the nature of reality, the natural cause and effect that happens in the world. And I like the way Dr. Ross talks about this, that God has crafted the laws of physics in order to keep evil in its confounds. You know, you cannot sin against yourself and against the natural order without paying the consequences of those actions.
Okay, but that in that case, it is appeal to consequentialism. The reason we have morals as a society, right? It is because you and I exist, right? If I was the only person on the planet, most moral things wouldn't exist, right? We have most. I mean, there are some things like moral, like, you know, should I be a vegan? Even if nobody other human existed, is it moral for me to kill an animal for food? It's still a question I have to think about, right? Because, you know, they might be some kind of sapient primate, or, you know, it's still a question that we have to deal with about morality. But for the most part, most of our morals come from the fact that we are dealing in a society. So, for example, the do not lie, right? Because that's a really simple one. Do not lie. The commandment is, you know, thou shalt not bear false witness. But what happens if that's conflicting with something like honor thy mother and father? Well, you need to lie in order to honor them. Or there are some situations where I think lying is morally permissible, right? I mean, would you agree? And by the way, I do agree with you. I think we can epistemically find these moral facts on our own.
Right. I believe that there are instances, and I'll quote my beloved friend and mentor who's gone, Dr. Geisler. He had what was called a graded absolutism. So when you have some moral principles that come in conflict, you exempt the lesser in order to obey the greater. So it's the issue of lying in order to save a life if you're in Nazi Germany. But I think you're forgetting a point, an important point on you know, what you're called consequentialism or utilitarianism, is that sometimes following the mandates of the conscience and that which is good is not so utilitarian or consequential for the individual. And I'll give you an example. My wife lost a very good job by choosing to do right. So the consequences were not very good for us as a family. We went through a tremendous amount of struggle by her choosing to do right. And of course, you look at it, you go, oh, you know, it would have been a better situation. Nobody would have gotten hurt. But we actually got hurt by doing what was right. So I think there's a greater instance of our knowledge of good and evil. We have the proximate cause, which is our own nature, rationality, but there's also this distal cause, which I would say is God, that grounds morality ontologically. We mean to make a distinction between that which is epistemologically known and that which is ontologically grounded. So in that sense, it does take God to be, in order to ground morality ontologically. Because you really can't have a ought in the sense of that which is demanding of us and our conscience. So that it really is, there is something within, but there's also, well, this is where you find yourself. You find yourself an effect without a cause. Where does this moral law come from?
Well, that it appeals
what
to
I'm
the
saying?
duty, right?
Ultimately, ontologically is what.
Yeah, well, that appeals to a deontological, actually, right? So but your gradient thing, the thing you were talking about, some kind of gradient, that to me is pretty close to act consequentialism, right? So with an act consequentialism, what determines whether something is morally good or not is if the net overall good outweighs the net to harm.
How would you answer my situation?
Well, I don't appeal to act consequentialism. So, I mean, in your particular case, I would appeal more to virtue ethics, right? Without knowing exactly what she did.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Basically, not lying, not choosing not to lie.
Well, in virtue, like I said, in virtue
you don't
ethics,
know, lawyers lie a lot.
Right. I mean, yeah, lying in itself is not a morally impermissible act. I mean, unless you're Kantian. But there are times where you're probably morally obligated to lie. If I don't want to cause a harm to somebody, right? If somebody
I've lied for the sake of the greater good. Yeah,
I have no problem with that. I really don't. Now, I
Honey,
can't get with if I say anything that's even partly not true, I have 1,000 people that are going to like tweet a million things, right? So I can't get away with that. But for the most people, lying in certain circumstances. I mean, parents lie to their kids all the time, right? Parents, mommy, daddy, are you fighting? No, we're just
right.
No, go to your room. I mean, there are times to lie, right? So I don't think that act itself or the consequences of the action is necessarily what constitutes what is morally good or not. But right. I do agree with you wholeheartedly that there's a distinct difference between our epistemological approach of how we know a moral fact to exist as opposed to the ontological of what is an ought, what we ought to do given a very specific situation. And this is where I disagree with you on that it has to be grounded in God, right? Nothing necessitates it be grounded in God.
When I say ontological, I'm not suggesting that is the ought. I'm saying that it's very existence, it's being.
The being itself of the moral fact.
The very fact that they exist, and we know they exist. So what is their ground of being? Why do they exist?
Well, but they also exist in a very different way. I mean, if you look at like what's called the queerness problem, right? I mean, these moral facts are considered to be kind of what's called queer. And that means that they're not like any other facts that we know of. They're not like some kind of ontological fact that they say, look, I got a cup. Ontologically, why do I have a cup? Well, I have a cup because
you got one and I didn't.
Yeah, because I'm special. But propositionally, right, either I have a cup or I don't. And the reason why I have a cup that does exist, according to correspondence theory, is that there's an instantiation of a physical thing that's the truth maker that makes that proposition a cup exists true, right?
You have the instantiation of the essence of cupness.
Cupness, yes. Just what? Here's a funny thing. It's kind of true. If you add ness to anything, you get some kind of weird instantiation.
Got a good word,
right? Yeah, right. There's actually a rule for that. It's called the what is it called? The ness. I think it's called the ness something. But there actually is a rule for that. You just add goodness, badness.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it.
but that's why we say what's true or not, right? When we say what makes something true is, well, it depends on your theory of truth, but let's go by correspondence theory, is that there's a truth maker. But when it comes to moral facts, there's no instantiation, right? There's not even a truth condition. So why is it there's a moral fact? And to me, I don't know if there's an ontological necessity that exists that there's a true moral fact abstract. I mean, this goes more to like nominalism versus mathematical Platonism. Do abstractions actually exist? I don't know. I don't think so. I go to nominalism. But
on that, let me push your illustration.
Can I ask a question real quick?
To make my point.
Can you define epistemological and ontological for people who don't know, like me?
Epistemological just means relating to how we know something. Like, for example, epistemologically, how do we determine what a moral fact would be, right? So if we're in the epistemological domain, we're kind of asking ourselves, how do we go about determining what a moral fact would be? How do we have knowledge of it? And knowledge is a very specific condition in philosophy.
How we know what we know is
how do we know what we know, whether we go to what's called particularism or Methodism, two approaches that Sosa approach. How do we know something first, and then we talk about how we know it, or do we talk about what we know, how we know it, and then what we know? But epistemologically speaking, all it is how do we know that stealing is bad? How do we know that? How do we have knowledge of this moral fact? Ontologically, when we talk about ontology, what Kenny's talking about is that moral facts exist in some capacity. It has being more so. Ontology deals with being. epistemological deals with knowledge. Kenny, you agree?
Yeah, yeah. And let me push your cup illustration. Do you think that there is cupness without that particular instantiation?
No, here, we're going to get into the problem with universals. I don't think properties really exist. I'm not somebody who thinks that Platonism
I'm thinking of a form, not the property.
The form, okay, yeah, the form. I'll concede a form.
Essence.
Yeah,
That,
I'll concede a form.
essences are,
The essence of the things that it is.
When you go to a dictionary and you look up what a bear is or a cup is, everything is defined by their essence.
Yeah, you're talking about the phenomenon versus noumenon.
Not necessarily, no.
Okay,
I'm talking about form and matter, matter and form.
Now you're getting into your Thomas stuff, aren't you? You're getting into your Thomas stuff.
Well, Aristotelian,
Thomism.
It's the sense that
yeah, I know, I get you.
Of cupness, the form has to be added to the matter because the form gives the form to the matter by which you now have a cup.
Well, do you think that the universal is instantiated? Like, for example, this cup is orange on the inside, right? Is that color orange an instantiation of some universal property of orange that has orangeness?
Orange is an accidental. So that means that colors are like tallness. They can only exist in things that have, well, they can only exist in substances. Colors are real things, but they have what we call a second level of being. They are accidents.
Yeah, like, no, I think they're accidental properties, but I tend to color realism. I don't think colors exist. I think they're phenomenological. I think they only exist in the mind.
But again, they have a second level of existence.
But you're talking about abstract forms.
But it
although I mean, you could actually say that colors are. You could say that colors are a real thing because you have pigments that are absorbing all the wavelengths of light except for
but there's a problem with
a particular wavelength, right? That's being reflected by the surface. So I mean, in the sense that color is reflecting a deeper underlying physical phenomenon.
No, because we're talking about the phenomenon itself, right? The phenomenon of the seeing of the color in the mind, like for example, when you see orange, that is not contingent upon any wavelengths. If that was the case, we wouldn't dream in color, right? There's no photon depositing any energy on the iris, the retina. You say, okay, we have a certain wavelength that's positing this amount of joules. The brain is processing this so that you're seeing color, but the phenomenon itself is strictly in the mind. It is an abstraction. It doesn't have any concrete hypostantiation. It doesn't exist in any real form. However, Quine argues that even in the case like with mathematics, that we have a usefulness to think about things in a concrete form, including groups, mathematics, sets, and things of that nature, right? A more of a mathematical Platonist approach. So I think it helps to talk about colors and forms like Kenny's talking about as something that is concrete, that has ontology, but that doesn't necessarily to me mean that it exists as far as some kind of existence in this possible world.
Well, it exists in that it is an accident. It inheres in another. And I think that's where your mistake is that you're trying to say tallness doesn't exist or weightness doesn't exist. It's a accident.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with you. I don't disagree with that. Yeah, no, I think it's an accidental property as well.
You need to have these accidental properties that are a part of canon. The 10 categories that Aristotle, deduced from reality. And so here or there, up, down, being acted upon and acting, those are all categories by which our very language is developed around those kinds of things. So when you're saying that color is not real, it's not real at the level 1 level of being.
No,
it's real at the level 2, which is accidents.
Yeah, no,
I guess as a scientist, I can't buy any of this because it's a physical phenomena where you've got a wavelength of light that's not being absorbed by a pigment. And that now our eyes are detectors that can detect certain wavelengths, and that information is processed in our brain to say, this is orange or this is red or what have you. But there's a physical phenomena that's very real, that is essentially manifesting itself as color.
So let me ask you a question. When you dream, what is the truth maker of that dream? What makes that dream true?
I don't.
Or specifically, what makes the color dream? Right? I mean, if you're saying that colors exist, right? I know,
but that would just be a neurological phenomena where you're.
Well, that's what this is. The color orange is a neurological phenomenon in the mind. Are seeing that. Matter of fact, some people actually argue that things don't even exist until they're observed. Right? It's all in the mind.
No, I mean,
especially if you're an idealist.
The orange color is a wavelength of light. That
is it.
That
just because my mind can grab a hold of the essence and grab that phantom and be able to think about it later doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means there's the ability to have it virtually exist by virtue of our mind.
But this is how it relates back to the morality. The moral facts exist in some capacity as some kind of moral abstraction. But this goes again to like Mackey's argument from queerness. They exist in a different way that a normative, a normal ontological fact would be. For example, like I said, the cup exists has a fact of the matter to be had because of the truth maker that exists, right? There's a simple instantiation that makes it the case. But moral facts don't have that kind of thing. What is the truth maker that makes a moral fact a moral fact? It doesn't have any truth condition per se, right? From a more of a deflationary approach, and it certainly doesn't have a truth maker for a correspondence theory approach. So when we look at these moral facts, we say, okay, yes, they have some kind of realism, they have some kind of existence, but what makes them the case? What makes it the fact that it's a moral fact?
I would suggest that in the same way that the form or the essence of cupness is joined to matter and therefore instantiated, we have the ontological grounding of morality, which is based on the very nature of God himself, that we see the evidence or remnants of that form instantiated in a certain sense within our constitution, within our consciousness. And here's where we're talking in areas that we don't know much about. I'm given kind of an allegory or an analogical way of conceiving of it. I'm not saying that it is this way, but I'm saying it's like the essence or the form that co-joins with the matter and instantiates and causes the existence of a cup, because the form is the very actus essendi, as it said, Thomistically, of this cup that now exists in time and space. I would suggest that the very nature of God, goodness itself, is communicated, or I would say even to be a better Thomist, that we participate in God's goodness, and in that sense it is reflected in us, and its grounding is the very existence of God. Ontologically, epistemologically, you don't even need to know that. You don't need to agree with me. But that is my argument as a Christian concerning why there is objective morality, where it comes from, why we have this sense that it does exist, because we are, if there is no objective moral law that proceeds from the very nature of God, we have an effect without a cause.
Well, you can't have effects without a cause, because
exactly
you can't. No, you can. I didn't say I can't. You can have effects without a cause. There's certain things in quantum mechanics that allow for that, but that's too much in the weeds.
Cause and effect.
Hey, look, law of cause and effect. I'm sorry, is not an actual physical law. It's just an observation that we've had.
Let me explain why cause and effect are self-evident. What is a cause? That which produces an effect. What is an effect? That's just definitional. You're just defining it that way. The predicate reduces. They become identical.
Now, the problem you run into is
the subject and predicate. They become the same thing.
You're just making a linguistic argument. No, we're getting in the weeds, but the problem is in quantum mechanics, there's certain things like spontaneous fission or weak nuclear decay that has no information in the system prior to the event. It literally does not have anything, no hidden variables that exist. It is an event. It is effectively an action without a cause. There is no causation for something like
What would
Weak
not
nuclear
the
decay.
very nature of the quantum vacuum be its cause?
No, when you have a weak particle, look, when you have a weak nuclear decay, right? We have no
You have a
predictability
thing
of that.
though.
You have
a nature.
You have an effect, right? We can see the effect. There's a weak nuclear action that's been decay that's been taking place, right?
Why are you calling that the effect though?
Well, I mean, we see it. We see something happen. We see an action, right? We see the neutron turn into a proton. We see an electron. We see a neutrino. We see the decay happen.
Okay, so it's the decay. So it's the nature of what to decay. What is decaying? Energy?
Decaying is
virtual particles.
Well, it goes to a more stable state. But basically, in beta decay, you have a neutron becomes a proton. You have an electron that's produced and a weak anti-neutrino. But the point is, what I'm trying to.
You have a thing.
Oh, hang on. The point. Hang on. Let me finish. The point you're trying to make is there's nothing in that system-wise. There's no cause of why there's a nuclear decay. What made that decay? We have no ability to.
The very nature of the quantum.
That's what that doesn't explain anything.
That's like saying, why does this man laugh?
No, if I push you and you fall down, why did he fall down? I pushed him. What was the action that caused that decay? There is none. It literally does not exist because there's no hidden variable in that system. Anyways, we're talking about we went off topic.
I know. But just because I'm pushing back like
I'm
this,
starting to get lost.
You know I love you anyway.
I'm starting to get lost.
Hey, straight up. Can I just say, Kenny's one of my favorite all-time people in history.
Yeah.
I mean that very sincerely. One of the nicest, smartest people, and most giving and genuine. And I'm honored to have him as a friend as well. So
I'll give you your money after the show.
Thank you.
So how does
he pays me well for saying that?
How does this wrap back around to net morality?
Well,
I was going to give him pushback on his objective moral claim that it requires a God, because even if the God exists, his morality is going to be ethical subjectivism. It's going to be because he says it's so, which is a subjective evaluation. There's nothing objective about coming from my mind that says this is what is immoral. So if God says don't lie, let's say that is the law, don't lie, period. God says this, right? There's nothing objective to be had there. First, it presupposes that an objective moral fact has to have somebody to give that moral fact, which I don't think is the case. But second, why did he make that the moral fact? Why did God say lying is bad? Right? And this, again, I was going to tell you I was going to get to youthful dilemma.
You want to go to youthful? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to go youthful. I was going to do it. Yeah, I know. But but I want the audience to recognize that if God says don't lie, there's pretty much two reasons why possible. There is God commanded it because it's good, and he thinks it's good not to lie, right? Or it's because he commands it, that is good. And it's not so much the commandment. Basically, in divine command theory, as I understand it, it's not necessarily God saying that is good to makes it good. It's your adherence to the God commandment, right? So if you obey the commandment that don't lie, you are doing something that is morally permissible. And as soon as you transgress and you disobey and you lie, now you've done a forbidden act, right? You've done something that is morally impermissible. But now the transgression is against God, and the whole point of having morality is interact with people. If I steal from you, I've harmed you. Right? But if I lie, how have I transgressed God? Why did he make that law?
Yeah, but this is where, the idea of, God, the moral commands that God gives flows out of his very nature. So
I know what that means, though.
Those are, inseparable in a sense. And again, it goes back to this concept of the image of God, that when you sin against another person, you are in effect sinning against God, right? And so because we're image bearers as human beings, the way you treat another person is the way you're treating God.
I'm fine with that, but I still don't understand what makes it the reason. I mean, God, okay, if God says do not lie, now I asked the theist, why did God say don't lie? What makes that bad by lying? Why did God command that?
Because it's endemic in his nature.
But that's not explanatory. That doesn't tell me anything. That just, okay. Why did I cross the street? Because, it was my nature to cross the street. I mean, it doesn't explain what the reasoning is why I crossed the street. Well, I was trying to go to the Jack in the Box. I wanted some grub. There's a reason for why God had these moral facts, or he just arbitrarily created them.
It's the sufficient reason.
Which I deny, by the way. I do deny principle of sufficient reason, but that's okay.
Yeah, it is a reflection of his very righteousness and goodness. His very nature is reflected in the morality that we.
But that to me doesn't make
You gotta
sense. If
split that dilemma
if God
down
said
the
it's
middle of
more,
the horns.
if God said it was morally permissible, that he thinks it's morally good to eat shellfish, that is morally good to lie. Let's say, because we assume there's an assumption, a presupposition here that God is wholly good, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So,
but there's a difference between a ceremonial law and between a moral law, right?
what do you mean?
Yeah. That's not. Yeah. We need to make a distinction between what are moral laws, what are theocratic laws, what are laws of diet.
Okay, that's fine too, but I don't think it matters about what the law actually is. If God commands something, whatever he is, and I know you don't subscribe to divine command theory, but if God said it was moral to lie, it would be the case to a divine command theorist, right? Because divine command theorist only is about obeying the rule itself. It's a deontological theory, correct? You have a duty to say, to yourself, I cannot lie because it transgresses the commandment given to me. That is what makes it a moral act to not lie, and a moral impermissible act, a moral act to lie under that guise of.
And I would go back to the point that Kenny made earlier, which I think is a really good point, and that is that in a sense the commands that God has given us, again, flow out of his very nature. And there's a logic that is, endemic in it because of the image of God concept, but that the consequences of obeying those laws are the consequences that are going to lead to the greatest good for those people involved. And so to me, that's part of why I think that there's validity to the Christian worldview, is that those moral commands are, in a sense, self-evident, and that those and so, in other words, the Christian system of morality and ethics subsumes consequentialism and even subsumes virtue.
But it doesn't assume it, and I think that's where I think you run into problems. You just said that. Okay, let's say this: God assume is omni-knowing. I mean, he just omnipresent, omnibenevolent, all the Anselm's types of omni. We'll concede that. If God knows everything, right? Are you going to say that God knows what the action is going to, the consequence is going to be, and he says don't do it because the consequences are bad? Is that because if that's the case, the reason why he's saying don't do something is just an appeal to consequentialism, which has a higher virtue than the divine command theory, because now God is appealing to consequences, which is act consequentialism or rule consequentialism, if you're whatever is good based upon some kind of acting in accordance to a given rule. So now God has a value, something of a virtue theory of a higher value than God just saying it itself. He has to appeal to something, which makes God saying it or not kind of redundant, because if it is the case that virtues are contingent upon consequentialism, not saying they are, then we have the ability to go find those out on our own. We don't need a God. It makes God redundant at that point.
Again, we can't conflate epistemology and ontology. We're talking about what grounds morality, not how we know it or searching out things like that. But I would, let me just throw in a corrector here as far as the nature of God, because sometimes we say things about God that are just absolute non sequiturs, category mistakes. And so to speak of God looking ahead in time and looking at the consequences of something is not a proper way to speak about God. When it comes to the doctrine of divine simplicity, and I know that I don't want to open up another can of worms here, but it is the classical view. It is the view that the Greeks adhered to, the Jews adhered to, the Christians adhered to, and the Muslims adhered to. The difference between the monotheism of the Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians is a matter of theology and not a matter of ontology. Monotheism is universally agreed upon between all the major religions and the Greek philosophers. So You have to make those kinds of distinctions as well. So when we get to Christianity and Islam, the difference between the monotheism is a theological issue, not an ontological issue. So divine simplicity is mutually agreed upon it, and
well, but not by
Just to
me.
clarify
But
things.
yeah, but you're talking to the non-theist, right?
No. I'm saying
we
I'm
gotta
not,
get.
I'm not a one-off here when I say what I'm about to say. When we talk about God, we can't talk about things that are accidental to him. He has no accidents. Everything that we say of God and predicate of God, it is essential. So when we say God is good, it's essential. It's not an accident. It's not
Okay.
the same way we have goodness. When we say that he's righteous and we predicate these omnis of him, we are simply saying that there is nothing accidental, and even his omnis are not defined the way that a lot of people define them.
I know we got to get to the Q&A here.
Neo-theists today.
I know we got to get to the Q&A, Kenny. So hang on. We got to get to the Q&A. But give me 30 seconds just to tie that in a bow, because
Sure.
you were making assumptions about divine simplicity, and I'm sure you would argue God's impassible as well, right? I'm sure you would argue that.
We'd have to define those terms, but yeah.
I'm going by the Catholic approach to impassibility.
Sure.
But for all practical purposes, these are things that are basically held throughout any kind of Christendom or monotheistic type.
Islam,
gods. Yeah. So what you're saying is not inconsistent with your theology. It has no applicability in a non-theistic moral theories, which do exist. So whether God's divinely simple, sure, then whatever. But I just don't think that is relevant.
Be wrong, but I'm not trying to help.
But anyways, I think we got to go to some questions here. So what do you got for us? And to whom? Is somebody going to be asking the questions in the live chat here? How do you guys want to do this today? Because we got Kenny with us.
I think they should be in the Q&A box, right?
Do I have the Q&A box?
I've got the chat and the Q&A box open. I don't see anything. So unless somebody else has got a magic window that I don't have.
I see Ozymandias out there. That guy.
Wait, Ozymandias? You mean Ozymandias Ramses II?
Yeah, that guy's a sharp guy. I really like him.
Yeah, he kind of knows what he's talking about occasionally.
I'm one of his fans, so.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan. Okay, I could probably go to the live chat and maybe look at the questions. He has a question to you, actually. He says, what is the reason that God's nature that results in morally issuing forth from that nature and not come? Okay, let me see if we can read this better here. Holy crud. This is very hard to read here. Let me try this one more time. What is the reason that God's nature that results in morality issuing forth from that nature and not some other being's nature? So what makes it come forth from God and not some other being's nature?
When I'm speaking of God, I'm speaking of when we look at the nature of what must be as the very ground of being for all reality, I'm getting back to what we could call Plato's the one, which necessarily grounds all of reality. The many come from the one. So when we talk about the nature of God, we have to speak of that which is rationally necessary by the light of reason. And that's why the Greeks stumbled upon this without any scripture. This stuff is available to us by the natural light of reason. When you
why wouldn't it be? How is it not possible that it could be some other God's being that it flows from?
Well, because when you have a God who his essence is to exist, and meaning his essence and existence are identical, you cannot have another whose essence is to exist, because you would have to have a difference in those two different beings, and then both of those beings would not be the one in which we're talking about.
Well, I'm not talking about any specific one. I'm the non-believer, right? So there could it not be another God that exists that has a moral, an understanding of morality that says, hey, look, under my positions that it flows from, this is what it means to be moral. And even still, could I not as a moral agent, right, have things that flow from my understanding of morality to tell people about what is morally good and what is bad, right? I mean,
well,
again,
let me say this:
it flows from biological history of society of why we have morals. It doesn't flow from some kind of necessary being.
Well, let me just say this: yeah, there can theoretically be other gods in the sense of polytheism, but they all have to go back to the one whose essence is existence itself.
But you're kind of begging the question.
You can't have two of
those. The one. By the way, isn't that your book?
No, this is rational. Yeah, I wrote about some
I
of
think
this
you wrote
stuff.
a book on this, didn't you? But
I'm taking more of a Platonic point of view, because I've been really studying Aquinas' 5 ways, and
you still think Aquinas' 5 ways are good arguments? Because think almost all of them
properly interpreted within the context of their metaphysics. Yeah, for sure. But his 4th way, the argument from gradation of being, that really is just an argument from the idea of beings being in, you told me not to say this, but beings that
I didn't say don't. I just said
mixture of act and potency.
I knew you were going to go there.
And so you got to go all the way back to the one who is pure act, and you can only have one who is pure act with no potency. If you have another God out there, he's necessarily going, or she or it is necessarily going to be composed of potential being and actual being. You can only have one actual being, and that's the God of the Bible.
Well, I mean, you could have one. I mean,
ego e me, o own, I am the being one, the existing one.
I mean, that's a whole. We're going to get into a whole different.
It's a whole nother.
Yeah, I know, and I'm not going to go down that. You're trying to take me down a road I don't want to go down right now. But we have another follow-up question to you.
I found the questions, by the way.
All right, yeah. You want to read them off?
For some reason, they're in the answered section. Do you see that?
Oh, I don't.
Okay.
Maybe you can ask them, but
all right.
Let me do the follow-up, and then
okay, I'll you do the follow-up, and then I'll ask the next question.
All right. So the follow-up question from Ozzy is, why is something's existence being essential, as is stipulated about God, a reason for why that being's nature is the ground of morality? How is that not more stipulation? Because it seems like to me, that's what you're doing. You're stipulating this, and then you're giving your reasons as more stipulations for your reasons without actually giving a reason for anything.
We're talking about a lot of things that I don't have the time to build those things up. But when I speak about God being simple, I have started from the way of remotion, which is to argue from effect back to cause. So when I see that all of existent being is contingent and composed, and they are composed in many ways, act, potency, substance, accidents, matter, form, there needs to be one who is the ground of the composition of everything else, who is not composed. If God had parts, if God wasn't simple, he would necessarily depend upon his parts, and his parts would necessarily precede him in existence, at least ontologically, if not, temporally.
But don't you think you're arguing that don't you think you're arguing the case that, look, if God exists, then this? But
I'm saying the world exists, therefore this.
Yeah, but I don't say that follows. I mean, okay.
I'm just following cause and effect all the way back. And so I see morality in the world, and I know that there must be a ground. I guess you could deny cause and effect.
Well, I don't want to get into the weeds too much, so I'm going to do this in about 30 seconds. But do you subscribe to PSR? Soft case.
Well, yeah. There is a reason, a sufficient reason, but just as long as you don't conflate PSR with causation, because they're not the same
I'm
thing.
fine with that. All right. So here's the problem I have with this. It's very similar to the argument from contingency. Okay. So if you have this, and I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but let's say that this possible world, okay, out of all the possible worlds, this is the only actualized world, which, right, it's indexical. We exist in it. So it's the only actualized one that God made. In this particular actualized world, he has a moral framework. He says that these things are moral or immoral, depending on either whatever side of the Euphoros dilemma you want to go. Okay, fine. But the problem that you have is there's only a couple of different options here. Either when you talk about the cause and effect, you have an infinite regression going back, just an infinite, right? You just causation, causation, or you have some kind of brute fact that exists, right? Which has no explanatory power, neither does the infinite regression, or you have a metaphysical necessity. You seem to be arguing a metaphysical necessity that God must exist, and he must have these moral facts. He must have these objective moral facts that are based upon his nature, which I think is kind of begging the question. But let's say that that's the case. You still have never answered, though, why does he have those moral facts? Just like, why did he create this particular world with all those moral facts? He could have created a different world with different moral facts if he wanted to have. He either created this world with the moral facts that exist in it because of a higher value theory, like consequentialist approach, because he knows everything, so he's appealing to consequentialism, or he just was arbitrary about it. He just said, I like these rules, and so I'm going to create this particular world with these particular moral facts because reasons. But we don't know what those reasons are. And so I don't think that it answers the question by saying that God created these moral facts and cause and effect going back to some kind of God.
What I'm saying is simply this. I can in no way, as a finite being, see the essence of God, know his being. All I have to go on, and this is why the ontological argument is not a sufficient argument, because we can't see the divine essence. The only way we know God exists is on that second level of being that I was talking about earlier. We can't see him as he is, but one of the ways that we can know who God is and what God is, by way of immanence, which is to simply look at the perfections in the world and walk backwards from that, knowing that there has to be a ground, looking at the way of causation, and I forget the third way, but there's basically three ways that we look and see what must be there, and I'm standing on the shoulders of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Saint Augustine, Anselm, even Aquinas, Fuzz Rana. I am standing on the shoulders of giants, and I'm only repeating what they've said. So,
and that's fine. I get that.
They're brighter minds than I, and they're looking at the nature of reality and deducing from the nature of reality what must exist in the divine cause.
But here, we're going to get more questions here in a second. But the thing is I'm not disagreeing with you as being inconsistent with theology. That's not the arguments. We're not talking about theology right now. You're consistent within your beliefs and theology. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, does morality need a God? Clearly, I think that it doesn't, because
I'm not a one-off. I'm not saying anything that's strange. The ideas that are today are the strange ones.
Well, see, but again, you're just. Here's the thing. I think that you're trying to explain to people that already believe that your positions are coherent within that framework. We're arguing that framework is not necessary.
No, I'm trying to get to you.
What's some other questions? I know Ozzy got more, but I know there's other people want to ask questions too.
So we got one from Steve Willing. It's a question to Steve McRae, actually.
Hey,
how would two non-theists resolve a profound, fundamental moral disagreement, assuming they're both dictators, so there's no getting out of it?
Okay. Here's the thing. I believe there are certain, like I said, objective moral facts. And like, for example, slavery, I believe is objectively moral wrong, right? Now, back in the biblical days, God said, hey, here are the rules by which you may have a slave, which I find to be kind of odd if slavery is something that's always wrong. So when you have two people that have moral disagreements clearly exist, right? So there is some subjectivity to be had. However, we can appeal to, they just didn't know back then that slavery was bad. If I hold to the objective moral position that is more, and I don't want to get into absolutism or universalism, but basically if I hold that as a moral fact to be had, that we can all have epistemic access to. And what I mean by objective is that you and I can go learn that this moral fact exists. It's not just contingent upon subjectivity. Like, my pain is subjective. You can't experience. My qualia, you can't experience. Those are subjective. But slavery is objective because we can see the harms done in society. And over time, we've learned that. So my approach would be that they just didn't know it at the time, but slavery was always wrong. So when you have two dictators and they're arguing which one's moral, a third party, a neutral, you can call it a neutral agent. There's actually a moral theory about a neutral agent that can come in and look and say, you know what? They're both wrong because of an objective measure to be had, and evoke, objective moral theory. So just because two people have a moral disagreement, I don't think that negates some kind of objective moral facts that could exist objectively. I just think they both could be wrong. But that's an approach. To me, there's no one set moral theory that covers all bases, right? But I think that we as individual thinking agents, this is what I'm saying. When you defer your morality to a God, you are not doing yourself justice because you are not thinking about those kinds of difficult questions. Like that was a good question that person asked. They have thought about this. How would you resolve this? And the reason you can think about this is because you're not deferring, well, whatever God said. Well, how do we determine which one's right? Oh, well, let's look at God. No, clearly there's not always going to be a case where you have God telling you what is the moral act, because I'm sorry, but God did not have any clue about technology nowadays, about certain things like online pornography. He didn't have any understanding of cloning. He didn't, all these things that we now, Fuzz wrote a book on transhumanism, right? I don't think that God planned that much ahead and said, oh, I'm gonna say that these are the 10 commandments, but you know what? In the year 2000, we're going to talk about is it moral to clone? That makes no sense to me. These are things we've learned over time.
But Steve, one of the things that I find interesting is that, in the book Humans 2.0 that you mentioned, we actually have a section in the book where we deal with the ethical issues surrounding the transhumanism, agenda, the transhumanism movement, and what's remarkable is that in most instances, I don't think secular bioethics actually is sufficient to engage in moral deliberations or ethical deliberations about how the technology should or shouldn't be used. And what's remarkable is that you can construct an ethical system based on Judeo-Christian ethics that is a very powerful framework to actually guide moral and ethical decision-making when it comes to emerging biotechnologies. And so this to me is the power of the Christian worldview and the Christian moral and ethical framework, is that it actually does allow you to go in and do effective deliberations, because again, not to bang the drum again and again, but it all centers around this concept of the image of God, and that all human life has inherent worth and value. And that's such a powerful concept that it allows you to navigate some very difficult and treacherous waters, so to speak.
If we could agree, though, we definitely need to clone a woolly mammoth, because I just found out that they may have only died out 4,000 years ago, which is
I thought like 11,000, 10,000, something like that.
Yeah, the woolly mammoth is my favorite animal, and I think since man may have contributed to the extinction, we need to clone.
Well, we hunted them probably extinction, but how about something along the lines of like cloning humans? Should be able to clone humans. I don't think that God gives us a way to even determine that. I think that we have to apply to other bioethical considerations in what's called an ethical theory of morality, right? Applied ethics, especially. We're talking about applied ethics at that point. We're not even in the realm of normative or metaethics. It's bioefficacy concerns. And so
I'm not an ethicist at all. Like I said, the whole moral argument for God is not even in my wheelhouse.
I think the main problem with the moral argument for God is that it presupposes that you have a benevolent, objective God to begin with. And I think there's a mistake to be had that there has to be one being out there that all morality type flows from, because I think that just is a stipulative type statement. I don't think it has any explanatory power whatsoever.
Well, I actually looked at the rest of Ozzy's question and follow-up, and I would like to say that I'm not saying that because God is, the ground of being and all this kind of stuff, that necessarily morality flows from that epistemologically. I'm talking in an ontological sense. And so my argument for God is not to start with God, and my argument for morality is not to start with God, but to start with the here and now, and then work my way back, and to say that morality must be grounded in God. So I can't
ground it in etimoia, and I can't ground it in just the fact that if I do something that is morally impermissible, it has caused harm to another sapient human being that has moral agency. Because the only reason I think we have morals is because we don't want to cause harm.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean, we are legit all moral agents of moral consideration. And so when I think to myself, what is an ethical thing to do? Is this going to cause harm to somebody in some ways? Now, again, there's many different ethical theories, but the reason why I don't do crappy things is because I know it's going to cause harm to somebody. I think that's an ethical framework, right? I don't need a God to tell me that.
And even pragmatism, but that's why I'm saying we need to keep the epistemology and the ontology separate. So all I'm saying is that ontologically, this is why I think morality has to be grounded in God. Our knowledge of it and our theories of it and things like that, we can talk about all of that, because at that point we're in the ground of the light of reason. And so I think there's nothing that we can know in Scripture that's not available to us in reality.
So it's redundant then.
Well, I'm just making a distinction between how we know it.
But I'm the non-believer, right? As the non-believer, the argument is, is morality necessary? Do we need a God? And I think that you've already conceded it's not. If I can find out these moral facts without God,
I don't think the moral argument is a very good argument for God.
No. I understand that, but do you agree though? If morals exist, it is not by necessity. That is because a God exists. That I think is the argument, because I don't think that flows. I don't think it follows that if morals exist, there's some necessary being that has to exist for that to be a true statement that morals exist.
Do you remember when we were driving to the AMP conference together? And the question you asked me,
our quality time together. Yes.
Yeah. Do you remember the question you asked me that was kind of on that level?
Refresh my memory, man. That was a long time ago.
It was basically, if God did not exist, could man still have the knowledge of good and evil? And could he do that which is good and shun that which is evil? And I told you, I said, I don't know. That's a good question.
Well, it's the same thing by ontology, right? I mean, can this cup exist without God existing? I mean, I think it's very similar to the morals. I believe that cup exists is not contingent upon some kind of God, unless you posit as the metaphysical necessity that by some kind of being, all things had to come from. But I think that's the stipulative.
Yeah. See, my answer would be that ontologically, yes, the cup, the matter necessarily depends upon God.
Okay. Let's get some more questions, guys. I know we're running out of time here quickly.
Yeah. Like this one from Slam RN. Wasn't there any morality before the Hebrew scriptures were written?
I think we've had morality as soon as we kind of realized that stealing from if you're a primate and you did a kill and somebody steals your kill, you got pissed off, right? We learned as a society that taking things from people is a bad thing. I mean, even like wolf packs, the alpha male has to eat first and the rest. If a beta male comes over and tries to eat that meat, they're going to get destroyed. They're going to get killed because you're taking something from somebody. You're harming somebody. And I think that morality has grown out of biological facts and societal facts that we've just over time realized, hey, the reason why we don't do certain things is because, and then the reasons, like if you want to appeal to consequentialism, why don't we go around killing everybody? Well, if everyone went around killing everybody, we wouldn't exist. That'd be a kind of an inherently bad thing. And I use the word bad thing is not morality wise, but we know as a society that would not benefit us.
Fuzz, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that idea is interesting. I don't know that I've got a profound thought, but one of the ideas that you see centered around transhumanism is this notion that we now are living in a time where technology has progressed far beyond the world that we quote unquote evolved in as hunter-gatherers, in that that framework no longer is applicable to us because we're living in a technologically advanced world and will continue. And so in that framework, you would see transhumanists actually looking at redefining what actually is moral. And that almost now makes it seem that if you start thinking about the origin of morality from a biological standpoint, or that morality actually is relative, then there's not really objective morality. If morality is somehow intertwined with biological necessity, I guess.
Well, okay, but let's say you're on a deserted island and you're the only human there. Is it moral to kill an animal to survive? Most people would probably argue yes, it's a necessity. But if you're in a place where you can, go to the store and you don't have to go out and hunt, you don't have to gather. Some people argue, especially vegans or vegetarians would argue, it is immoral to go out and hunt animals. And by the way, I think it's immoral to trophy hunt, right? Do I think it's immoral to hunt? No, of course not. I think there's actually reasons to hunt. But trophy hunting, I think is doesn't satisfy the harms and benefits thing, because at that, to me, you're doing harm, and it's just because your own, self-gratification, but you're taking the life of an animal unnecessarily, right? And so I have ethical issues with that. But a vegan or vegetarian would say, hey, look, we shouldn't kill any animal. We shouldn't even eat meat. And I don't think God gives us a way to determine that. I don't think God tells us. Capriciously, he kind of does. He says, don't eat shellfish. Well, why? What is the reason why God gave the law? Don't give shellfish, right?
On this issue, I would like to state for the sake of the audience that I admit that, for example, the Code of Hammurabi, when you look at the ancient Near Eastern laws and treaties and documents, even before the scripture was written, the same kinds of moral laws were there within the the Babylonians, the Assyrians.
Yeah, but that was the eye for an eye. Do you think that's still moral? Do you think there's retributive justice, or do you think we should have retribution as a moral act? Because that has changed, right?
I wouldn't take that as a literal truth, but the idea of equal justice is behind that statement.
Okay, but I'm talking about actual full-on retributive justice, right? I mean, I'm not against retributive justice. I tend more to restorative. But let's say, arguendo, that, hey, look, I believe in retribution in order to establish a society that doesn't transgress. If I know that you harm me and I'm going to harm you right back, the likelihood of us harming each other, the whole principle of mutually assured destruction is basically, I don't want you to do to me what I'm going to do to you, think about doing to you, so I don't do it, right? It's eye for an eye. You launch one missile, I'll launch one missile.
I think I would not agree with your interpretation of that particular statement within, we're getting some cues to speed up. So let me just say that I think it's a principle, principle of justice. Justice has to be equal, and I also think that we know that by the light of reason, there has to be an equal punishment for the equal crime, and I think we are decrying that in our own culture, where we see these crimes and guys being put away for many, many, many years. It just doesn't fit the crime. And then we see murderers put away for a very short time, and we know that that's not right. So I'm just saying.
Yeah, I guess that's because we're learning as we go of what is a proper sentence. And I agree with you that wholeheartedly that sentences are messed up. Do we have time for one more question, or we got to wrap up?
Yeah, I have a question for Fuzz. As a Christian, how are there seemingly immoral things in the Bible that God did or supported?
Like slavery is a big one. And by the way, it was not indentured servitude. It's not indentured servitude.
Yeah, well, I'm not so sure that I would see anything in Scripture that I would necessarily see as immoral that God is commanding. I guess I would want to see the example, and I think the idea. The idea of slavery, in the Hebrew context, to me, as you pointed out, that there was essentially a set of rules or a framework for how to employ slaves in a way that was fair and just. And so you could just see that as part of the economic system of that time. I mean, many of us are employed, and you could see our employment as a type of slavery where we are devoting portions of
no,
Yeah.
it's not even real. Those are not comparative at all. That's
Oh,
not,
sure.
that's,
I mean,
no,
well, I mean,
it's not. You're talking about owning somebody as property. You're owning them. If you could beat a slave, you own them. They're less than human. At least when you're working for a wage, they don't own you physically. Now, military may be a different thing, but there's still things that they cannot do whatever they want. So I mean, you're still a human being. You still have personage. When you're a slave, you're property. You're chattel. You're lower than dirt.
I agree with that, but in the Hebrew context, the framework for how to treat a slave was essentially recognizing that slave was had inherent worth and value, that slave was to be treated in a particular way.
So beating your slave, driving a nail through their ear. I mean, I think these are immoral acts myself, right? I mean, I don't know much about the Bible, but from what I recall, if you have a Jewish slave and the slave wants to stay with you, in order to keep their wife and kids, you have to drive an awl through their ear, right? And then they become, your slave kind of forever kind of thing, if I'm not mistaken, right? Because if the person wants to leave after 7 years, if they're a Gentile, I don't remember if there's a Gentile or non-Gentile, they have to leave their kids behind and their wife behind, right? So there was some kind of argumentum ad baculum, is that, you do this or there's going to be a consequence. There's going to be a threat. Right? It's coercion to me. And so I don't think, well, let me wrap it up real quick. The whole thing in the Bible, to me, I find to be morally deplorable in any context. And anytime you have to give rules of how to have slavery, it is morally impermissible to me. And somebody had asked in the live chat, well, how do you get your morals? My morals are derived from moral ethical theories and from my family and my parents and society and my friends and biology that are hardwired. There's nothing wrong with having morals as you understand them, as you look in society and say, look, I think this is wrong. And then you have a moral theory that you apply to. Most people don't do that explicitly, but I do think that they have some kind of implicit thing they appeal to when they say something. Why is something wrong? But that's where we get our morals from. We get them from learning. We get them from looking at observing the world and discovering them. But anyways, we got to wrap this up, I think.
This comes up a lot, this issue of slavery. And let me just preface what I'm going to say with this statement. I don't know the answer to those types of questions. I don't know why God didn't reform the Israelite culture right away.
I mean, he would have known that. He would have known that today's society, slavery would be abolished, right? He would have known this.
Well, the New Testament was the ground of the the abolition movement here in America. With some, it was their grounds to keep slaves, but for those that were truly committed Christians, it was the very document that empowered them morally to free the slaves. So eventually, these things were worked out, so to speak, through the existence of Christianity. And I'm just gonna state various propositions here. I do find it interesting that it's a big issue today. A lot of people want to blast the Old Testament because of slavery, but I find it interesting that they're criticizing the Old Testament by the ethics of the New Testament. Anybody in America is absolutely ingrained and predisposed to agree with Christian ethics because of the nature of our culture. Our founding fathers, in proclaiming all men created equal, is what identifies us as Americans. Our independence, our individual value is what it means to be American. There are still slaves in other countries, in Eastern countries. And so it's only now in America that is thoroughly permeated with Christian thought, whether atheists want to agree with it or not. Their ethical values are informed by Christianity. Now, let me simply say, as far as the Old Testament, yes, there was slavery. There is a sense in which the Mosaic law certainly was a much better system for slaves to live under than the surrounding countries. So there was that fact. I would say another fact.
Well, you got 30 seconds,
that,
Kenny.
I think that's a really poor way of expressing it, though, Kenny, because you're saying basically.
All right, you're going to hurt my feelings now, Steve.
Yeah, I'm going to try, because you're basically saying, hey, they both had slavery, but you know what? These have better conditions for slavery. Therefore, it's better.
I was just pointing it out in the sense that that's an observation.
All right.
Because when you look at Abraham and his servant, he was actually going to give his servant his entire inheritance. He was treating his slave as a son. So there are lots of dynamics to consider.
But I gotta tell you, Kenny, I appreciate you coming on, and it's really good to see you, man.
This was great. Yeah, good to see you too.
I'll get you on my channel too, by the way. My channel is in the video description. If you want to come check out my channel, Steve.
And we'll trade hair secrets.
Yeah, no, dude. We finally got my ability to go get it taken. The things are lifting here for a little while, so I actually got a haircut. But come check. Like I said, let me show myself out, because we're going to wrap it up. Go find my channel, Steve McCrae, on YouTube. We discuss philosophy, we just discuss science, all this kind of stuff. Kenny and Fuzz have been on my channel many times. Adore them both. And then Fuzz, what do you got? What do you got coming up or anything?
Well, let me just pitch what is going to happen the next time we have a program. We're going to take on the question, is religious experience for you valid evidence for me? So we're going to look at the argument for God's existence from religious experience. So that should be an interesting topic.
Hey, Fuzz, on that point, Norm Geisler's dissertation at Loyola was on that very question, and I'll send that to you.
Okay, I'd like to see that. That would be. Yeah. And then also we've got a good, the bad, and the segment coming up. That's going to be bonus material that we'll record soon. And that question that we're going to take on is, should extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? So anyway, it looks like that's about all she wrote for today's program. So thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to check out our website, agreetoargue.com, and then also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Agree to Argue, or like us on Facebook, again, at Agree to Argue. And also don't forget to subscribe to our Agree to Argue YouTube channel. So until next time, see you.
Good night.